Welcome back to week 3. This week we're going to be working on this section here of our blanket, starting with part 9. So we will join to the bottom corner of block number 5 beside that vertical line to make chains and make our foundation row. So I attached to my bottom corner of the vertical line beside block 5, chained 30, and now I'm ready to work and pick up my loops for the foundation row. So just a reminder that you turn your chain over, and with that very first chain you put your hook in that back bump and pull up a loop. So we will pull up 30 loops across for our foundation row, and then join to the first row of the vertical block in the loop behind that side stitch for the very first row, and then work our return pass. So you can go ahead and work that foundation row, and I'll see you back here after that. So we're going to be working cables again for block 9. We have a couple of smaller cables where we're working either 2 knit stitches over 1 purl stitch, or to the left, or 2 knit stitches over 1 purl stitch to the right. So there's only 3 stitches involved instead of 4, except for a couple of times in this block. So I'll help you with those. If you work carefully, you can try and do these cables without the stitch holder. So we have worked our foundation row, which is all TSS, and done the return pass. So ready for row 2, we have 6 TSS stitches, a purl, and 2 knit, and those form the one cable, and right next to it will form the second cable. So I'm going to show you on these first 2 cables working those in the forward pass. We'll do some TSS, and the next set of cables I will show you working in the return pass. So last week I showed you some forward pass cables. I have a different way to work those this week that's slightly easier than what I showed last week. So lots of options for you, but let's get started with row 2 and those 6 TSS stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 TSS stitches. So then we'll work our purl stitch and 2 knit stitches. And these are the stitches for our first cable. So to work them in the forward pass, we will remove those 3 stitches, and that purl stitch naturally falls to the back. You may put it on your cable holder. Since it's only 1 stitch, if we work carefully, we should be able to do it just with our hand this time and pull that loop over for our cable. And then right away we work into the next cable. So it's 2 knit stitches, 1 and 2, and a purl stitch. Okay, so we'll do this one in the forward pass as well. You remove the 3 stitches, and this time those 2 knit stitches will fall to the front. Now again, if you work carefully, you don't need to use your cable holder. I find with the knit stitches, I like to use the cable holder, so it's up to you. So we put that purl stitch back on, cross our knit stitches, like so, and we've made the 2 cables. They're already complete. We worked them in the forward pass. Now let's work 6 TSS stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we have the 2 sets of cables again. This time we're going to leave the loops on our hook, and we'll work these two sets when we come to them in the return pass. So we do the purl and the knit and a knit. And then the next cable is 2 knit and purl. Now, if you like doing the forward pass cables, you can continue on in that same way. This is just to show you what they look like in the return pass as well. And then we have the 6 TSS, the simple stitches at the end of this row. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then this is row 2, so we find the second row on the line and connect to the back side as we have previously. So now we'll start the return pass. So we'll take off those 6 TSS and then work the cable. So that's the trick with working the cable in the return pass. We need to count how many stitches before we get to the cable so we know to remember to do the cable. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those are our 6 TSS stitches. We've reached our first cable. So this time you will take the 4 loops off the hook because we have our return pass loop that's on the hook first. So we take the return pass off plus the 3 stitches of the cable. Put those 2 knit stitches on our holder if you're using one. The knit stitches go to the front. Put the purl stitch back on, cross those knit stitches, and put your return pass loop back on the hook. So we've made our cable. So we'll take these 3 cable stitches off. When we're only working with 3 or less stitches on our cable, we do not need to add that chain 1 in between the knit and the purl. So it'll just be the regular return pass of taking these 3 stitches off, 2 and 3. And now we've reached the next cable. So again, we'll take those 4 stitches off. The purl stitch goes to the back. Put the knit stitches back on, the purl stitch back on, and the return pass loop back on. And then we can take those 3 stitches off too. And you can see how we have created the 2 cables. And then since we already worked the next set of cables in the forward pass, I'll just continue with a straight return pass the rest of the way here. So that was the 6 TSS. Now I can take off the cable stitches because we worked these ones in the forward pass. And then ending with taking off those 6 TSS stitches. And that is row 2 with 2 sets of cables. So again, you can choose if you're going to work it forward pass or return pass, whichever flows easier for you. We'll continue on with row 3 now. We'll start with the 5 TSS, and we still have these 2 cables, but in between them now we add 2 more purl stitches as we're making a center in between the cables now. So let's start with our 5 TSS. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now we're ready for our stitches of our cable. So we do a purl stitch first, followed by the 2 knit stitches, and these knit stitches fall in the knit stitches that we used in our cable. You'll need to be careful that the purl stitch that crossed behind is pulled out of the way to complete this knit stitch. And then if you're working your forward pass cable, you'll take those 3 off, put the knit stitches back on, cross the purl behind, like so. And then we want to make sure we have to purl the next 2 stitches, and they're a little bit hidden right here and right here, because those are the stitches we crossed behind. So those are our 2 purl stitches that are not part of the cable stitches of this row, but in between. So now we're ready for the next cable. 2 knit stitches and a purl stitch. If you're working the forward pass, you remove those, put the purl back on, put the 2 knit back on. And again, you can decide if you want to use your cable holder or not. That's entirely up to you. Then in between this set of cables and the next set of cables, this time we will have 4 TSS. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now we're going to start our second set of cables for row 3, and this set I'm going to work on the return pass to show you one more time how that works. So we start with a purl stitch and 2 knit stitches, and those will be what we work the cable in the return pass. Then we have these 2 purl stitches, trying to find those crossed purl stitches from last row to work these purl stitches. So sometimes I find if I just sort of fold my work slightly over, that purl stitch pops out a bit easier to see. And then for the next cable, we start with 2 knit stitches and a purl stitch. Then we end with 5 TSS. So if you're working the cable in the return pass, we need to pay careful attention to how many stitches are before we get to our cable. So 5 TSS, connecting to that vertical line, and take off the 5 TSS. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I've reached my first cable, taking off those 4 stitches, put the purl back on, carefully put the 2 knit back on and the return pass, and then pull them off. 2 knit and 1 purl. And again, remembering we don't need to make that chain 1 in the smaller cable. Then we take off these 2 purl stitches, and I'm at my next set of stitches for the cable, pull them all off. The purl stitch goes to the back, the 2 knit stitches go back on the hook, cross the purl stitch and back on the hook, and return pass back on the hook. And then we can take these 3 stitches off with our return pass, and then we have those 4 TSS. And we've reached our other cable stitches, which I already showed worked in the forward pass. So we just need to remove these stitches as a regular return pass. Oops, there we go. So just have to watch for those purl stitches. Sometimes they can sneak and hide behind the knit stitches. You have to watch that you make sure you get those. Okay, so that is the first 3 rows of block 9. So I'm going to let you continue to follow the chart. So we finished 3, so we're ready for row 4, where you'll have to start only the 4 TSS, a cable, 4 purls in between before the next cable, and only 2 TSS in between the second set. So I'm going to let you work and finish row 6. I will come back for row 7 and show you that cable that's with the 4 stitches instead of 3. Just to mention to you, row 6, we are not working any cables. We just have knit and purl stitches and a regular return pass for row 6. So you go ahead and work those few rows, and I'll meet you here for row 7. So I've worked the first 6 rows, and yours should look something similar to this. On that last row, the 2 cables were side by side, and then this time in round 6, we just worked the 4 knit stitches in a row on top of those cables. So now we want to work row 7. We'll have the 3 TSS, 2 purl as well. We're going to work 10 knit stitches, but those 2 knit and those 2 purl, the 4 stitched together, form our cable this time. So I will show that cable in the forward pass. If you are preferring the return pass, you'll just need to watch as you work your return pass, and I'll show you where you would start the cable. So we'll work this row together, starting with our 3 TSS or simple stitches. 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll knit stitch in both of these knits here. And now we will do those 10 purl stitches. So I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then these last 2, 9 and 10, are on the knit stitches. The first 2 knit stitches are that group of 4 of last time, and then we will knit stitch in these next 2 knit stitches. And now to work this cable in the forward pass, we will take off 4 loops because it's 2 stitches crossed over 2 stitches, and it's a good idea to use the cable holder for this. So the 2 purl stitches go to the back, put the 2 knit stitches back on the hook, cross those purls and put them back on the hook, and our 2 over 2 stitches cable has been completed. Then it's 8 purls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 purl stitches. And then we're ready for the 2 knit stitches in the 2 knit stitches from previous row, and ending with the 3 TSS. Make our connection to the vertical line and start the return pass. So if you didn't work the cable in the forward pass, you will take off 13 loops and then work the cable. If you worked the cable with me in the forward pass, we can just do a straight return pass. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So if you need to work the cable, you would do so now. If not, we'll just continue with our regular return pass. Always being careful on those crossed purl stitches, that we remove them one at a time when we've done the cable. And there we go, that's row 7. So you can see how our cables of this first circle are now going to cross over into the other one, and then these ones will appear over on this side to make our lovely design. So row 8 does not have a cable in it as well. You'll just be working those 4 knit stitches on top of the cable that we did for row 7. And then when we work row 9, we will start doing those cables again that are side by side in the middle and on each end. And as you work your way up the chart, so when you get up to row 14, we will have a 4-stitch cable again, 2 of them, and then again in row 21, the 4-stitch cable. So I'll maybe check in with you after row 14 to see how that went, and hopefully it goes well for you following the chart to that point. So I'm ready to start working row 10. Just thought I'd check in with you a little bit, make sure you're doing all right. I have had to pull out rows 9 and 10 a few times, so I thought maybe we should just do it together. So row 10, we're going to start with 4 TSS stitches, 1, 2, and 3, and then this 4th one is the purl stitch that we crossed over for the cable. I find these purl stitches sometimes can be quite hidden, so we need to kind of watch for those and look out for them. So 4 TSS stitches, and then the 2 knit stitches in the knit stitches that are there. And then a purl stitch. So these last 3 stitches, the 2 knit in the purl, if you're working the forward pass cable, you would work the cable there. Then we have 4 purl stitches in between the cables. That's 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll work another purl and 2 knit. So again, if you're working the forward pass cable, you would then take off these last 3 stitches and work the cable. If you're not doing the forward pass cable, you will notice that we have worked 6 purls in a row in between the 2 sets of 2 knit stitches. And then as we fill in between these 2 cables, we want to make TSS. So watch for that. It's not purl stitches here, it's 2 TSS. And did you notice those were both in a purl stitch that had been crossed, so they were somewhat hidden. So I'll show you again. We have these 2 knit stitches, and it's this purl stitch right there that we're going to pick up for the first TSS. There we go. And then the second one right here just before the 2 knit stitches. And then we will work 2 knit, 1 and 2, and a purl. And that would be, those last 3 stitches here would be the cable for your forward pass cable. We'll have the 4 purl in the middle. So it's 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and 1 more purl stitch. That would be 6 purl stitches in a row, and the 2 knit. So again, you can work your cable if you're working the forward, split the yarn there. Okay, and be careful on these knit stitches. It's easy to go in between the stitch of the purl stitch that was crossed behind. So I find I need to pull that over just a bit to pick up the knit stitch. And then we end with 4 TSS. That first one is that crossed purl stitch behind, which can be a little bit hidden. So those are our loops picked up for row 10. So we'll start the return pass, and I'm going to be showing you the return pass cables. So we will remove the 4 TSS, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're ready for the first cable. We take off 4 stitches, the purl goes to the back, put the 2 knit back on the hook, bring the purl over and put the return pass loop back on, and then we will carefully take those 3 cable stitches off. Then we have the 4 purl stitches to remove, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we've reached the stitches for our next cable. The 2 knit fall to the front, put the purl on the hook, put the 2 knit back on the hook, pick up the return pass loop, and carefully take those cable stitches off. Then we have these 2 TSS stitches to take off, and then we've reached the next cable. Purl stitch to the back, cross it over, and then return past those cross stitches. And then again we have the 4 purl, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then ready to make our last cable for this row. There we go. And take those cable stitches off carefully. And then we have our 4 TSS, 2, 3, 4, and the border stitch. So that's row 10. Okay, so just remembering the TSS now, we'll be increasing our number of TSS's in between these 2 cable sections. And then also watching for those purl stitches, particularly where we've crossed them on the cable, they can be hidden. Okay, so now we're ready for row 14. Remember, 14 has the 4 stitch cables twice this time, so we're going to work those together. So we start with our 6 TSS stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then we'll work 3 purl stitches, 1, 2, and 3, and 2 knit stitches. So these 2 knit stitches will be the second or the third and the fourth knit stitch in the group of 4 in the previous round. So if we're working the forward pass cable, we want to take these last 4 loops off. We'll put the purl stitches on the cable holder and bring these 2 loops back on our hook, cross the purl stitches, and continue picking up loops. If, however, you're doing the return pass cable, which is what I prefer, you will leave those 4 loops on the hook as you've picked them up. We'll do another purl stitch, and then the 6 TSS, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and a purl stitch. And 2 more purl stitches, 1 and 2, and then the 2 knit stitches, 1 and 2. So again, if you're working the forward pass cable, take these last 4 loops off and cross your stitches for the cable. We'll work 1 more purl stitch and pick up 6 TSS, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and joining to our vertical line, Then we take off those 6 TSS, that's 3, 4, 5, and 6, and the purl stitch. Then we've reached our cable, so we're going to take 5 loops off our hook. The 2 purl we put on our cable holder to the back, put the knit stitches back on, cross, and put our working yarn back on for our first cable. So if you've already done the cable, you'll just start with us right here again to work the return pass through those cable stitches. After we take off the 2 purl stitches, because we've used a total of 4 stitches or 2 crossed behind a 2, we want to add that chain 1 in between just to give it a bit more space and give on that cable, and then take off the 2 knit stitches to finish that cable. Okay, then we'll have the purl stitch to take off and the 6 TSS, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and that purl stitch. And then we've reached our next cable, so we'll take the 5 stitches off our hook, put the purl stitches onto our cable holder and to the back, knit stitches back on our hook, cross those purl stitches and put them back on the hook, pick up our working yarn. Then we'll take off those 2 purl stitches, add the chain 1, and then take off the 2 knit stitches as well. And then we can take off the rest of those stitches in this return pass. And that is row 14, where we have those larger cables in the center. Okay, so working at row 15 now. It does not have any cable stitches, so just pick up your stitches and do a regular return pass. Then starting again at row 16, we will be working cables again, and that's just basically a repeat of the first section that we did. So I'll let you continue to work through the second half of this chart, and I will meet you up at the top at row 26 or 27. Then row 27, our final row of block 9, we will make 7 TSS. It's 3, 4, 5, 6, and that hidden purl stitch for 7, and then the 4 knit stitches, 1, 2, 3, and 4 knit stitches, 7 TSS again, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and my mistake, it's 8 TSS. That 8th one is that sort of hidden purl stitch from the last cable. 4 knit stitches again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Be careful not to go through that purl stitch. And then TSS, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and make our final connection, and then we can work the regular return pass. When you've completed the return pass, do the bind off row as well, and fastening to the vertical line before you fasten off, and that's block 9. You may find this block doesn't lay quite as straight as some of the other ones. Once we get our lines worked on and eventually our border, that should work its way out. When we've completed block 9, we're going to work a vertical line on the one side and then the horizontal line across the top of this block. So you can attach your yarn at the bottom corner in the back and chain 4 to start. Then to make our foundation row, we turn that over and pick up a loop through those back bumps of each chain. So we will pick up 4 loops. Three and 4, and then we want to connect and the back of this first row in that little bump just behind our border stitches for row 1 of a vertical line. Okay, and we'll just work each of the rows along the side with TSS, picking up our loops and connecting to the next row up. So block 5 had 27 rows, so we will work these 27 rows for our vertical line, connecting to the side of each of block 5 rows, and that'll meet you up at the top to start the horizontal line. So once we've worked our vertical line, we're going to start working the horizontal line across. So we will pick up the 4 stitches or the 4 loops across the top of the vertical line. And then working behind our stitches here, we want to pick up the 30 loops across. 1, 2, 3, and so on. So you can go across and pick up those 30 loops. So when you've picked up your 30 stitches across, you can go ahead and make the connection to the next row on the vertical line from last week. And then you should have 36 loops on your hook before we begin the return pass. So you can go ahead and work the return pass plus 2 more rows of TSS, and you also want to make the bind off row for this horizontal line. So when you've completed your bind off row on the horizontal line, just make sure you fasten off, and I always join to the same row from the vertical line as my last pickup line or the last row of the horizontal line. So block 9 complete with its vertical and horizontal line. So we want to prepare for blocks 10 and 11. So we're just going to add some stitch markers to help us find our starting places there. So we'll count over to the 13th stitch, or these loops just past the border. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So that's where block 10 will start. 1, 2, 3, 4, where we start for making the vertical line in between blocks 10 and 11. And then block 11, we will count in 1, 2, 3, 4 on this 5th line is where we will start for block 11. Block 10, we're going to be working a fairly standard Tunisian pattern known as the honeycomb stitch pattern. It tends to be a favorite with many who work Tunisian crochet. It is also a very good stitch to use on a border stitch because it really controls the curl that can often creep in with Tunisian projects. So to work the honeycomb, it's just an alternate 2-row pattern. So the 1 row we will start with the purl stitch, Tunisian stitch, purl, simple, purl, simple. The next row will start with the simple stitch, purl, simple, purl. So we just alternate those 2 rows back and forth, where the simple stitch falls and where the purl stitch falls. So let's get started with that. So for block 10, we want to start at this first marker that we place that's closest to the vertical line from last week. And when we join this one, this is the time where we join on that back loop from the first one. Or from the front loop. So it's behind our mark stitch on the back loop of that. Then working our way across the top, we're going to pick up these 13 loops on that back bump behind our bind off stitches. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, and the 13th stitch. So there should be 14 loops on your hook. We started with 1 and picked up 13, and then we'll just join to the next line up or row up on that vertical line from last week. And work our usual return pass. So I'm going to show you rows 2 and 3 of block 10 to help you establish that honeycomb pattern. I'm just working on a separate little swatch here to show you the pattern, and then I'll show you what it looks like on the blanket. So to start, we will start with a purl stitch and a simple stitch in the next, and then we'll repeat those 2 stitches, purl stitch, simple stitch, all the way down the row. Purl stitch, simple stitch, purl stitch, simple stitch, purl stitch, simple stitch, purl, simple, and purl. Then you'll make your connection of the vertical line and work a regular return pass. Okay, so that's row 2, the first row to start the honeycomb pattern. For the next row, row 3 of our block, we will reverse that and start with a simple stitch first, followed by the purl stitch. Simple stitch, and then a purl stitch. So as we continue that down the line, the simple stitch is worked into the purl stitch from last row, and we will purl on last row's simple stitch. Simple and purl. Simple and purl. Simple, purl, and then we'll end with a simple stitch, and again connecting to that vertical line and working a regular return pass. So rows 2 and 3 will be repeated for the rest of the block, and you're starting to see that honeycomb shape emerge. So when I show you on the completed block, you can see how these purl and simple stitches make that honeycomb pattern. And we've just worked these first 3 rows here. So you can continue to work that all the way through up to row 27 and work a bind off row as well. So when you've worked your 27 rows, be sure to work the bind off row as well across the top, fastening it to this vertical line. Then we will come down to the line again, and at our second marker we want to attach our yarn to make a vertical line here. So again, we will attach to the back loop of our marked stitch. And then ignoring this bind off row, we want to pick up a loop in each of these 4 stitches across. So starting with the marked stitch, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll connect to the back of that first row of block 10 that we have just finished. And work the return pass. Okay, so we're just going to continue with rows of TSS as we have for all our other lines, working up this block that we just finished for 27 rows of the line. And then this time we are going to work a bind off row on this line as well. So I will meet you up at the top after row 27. When you've worked the 27 rows for the vertical line beside block 10, we will not bind off this line, rather we'll just fasten off to finish this line. To work block 11, this is another lace pattern or azure pattern. We have a couple of new symbols to look for in our chart. So the one is this symbol here, which means TSS 2 together stitches. So I'll be showing you how to work that. The other is this green oval circle, and that represents a chain, and that should be found in the return pass. So if we look at our chart for block 11 to start it, you can see how we have 3 rows of TSS followed by a row of reverse stitch. So we're going to work those first 4 rows first, and then I'll help you work your way through this next section of the chart to see how that will look for this block. So to get started, we have our last marker here just inside from our vertical line. We're going to be placing or joining our yarn on the back side of this loop, and then we want to pick up our 13 loops across. So starting where the loop that was marked in the back side of that stitch, we are going to start picking up our 13 loops across. So 1, 2, 13 loops across, and then we'll make a connection to that first row of the vertical line that we just completed, and do our regular return pass. So that the foundation row acts as that first row of TSS that's marked on our chart. Then we're going to work 2 more rows of TSS, so you can go ahead and do that. And after 2 rows of TSS, you'll work the reverse stitch for another row. So 3 more rows you can work on your own. 2 of TSS and 1 of the reverse stitch, and I'll meet you here at the end of row 4. Okay, so at the end of row 4, we'll have these 3 rows of TSS. That third row will look different now because we worked the reverse stitch on it, and there's that ridge or that texture line created. So for row 5, we are going to start in with our new symbols. So we'll TSS in the first stitch and then work 2 together, TSS in the next, 2 together, and we'll repeat that down the row. And then on the return pass, we're going to add this extra chain 1 in a few places. So I'll help you understand that as we work through. As we pick up our loops for row 5, we will only have 11 loops on the hook, as these are acting as decrease stitches, and the chain 1 then puts that extra loop back on the hook or gives that space for it. So I'll show you how we do that. So we TSS in that first stitch, and then we put our loop under the next 2 loops, or put our hook under the next 2 loops, and pull up a loop. So that's the 2 together formed. TSS in the next stitch, hook under the next 2 to pull up a loop. TSS in the next stitch, hook under the next 2 to pull up a loop. TSS in the next stitch, hook under the next 2, we'll pick up the last loop as a TSS, and then joining to our vertical line, and we should have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 loops on our hook. So we yarn over and we pull through those first 2 loops. Chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, and then we'll pull through the last 3 loops, like so. You can see how we've created those open spaces again, or that lace section. So then for row 6, we will pick up the first 2 stitches as TSS stitches, and then we have this hole created, or this space. We put our hook into the hole to pick up a loop. Then we'll TSS in the next 2, 1 and 2, and then into the hole to pick up a stitch. TSS in the next 2, into the hole to pick up a stitch, TSS in the next 2, into the hole to pick up a stitch, pull up a loop. So there should be 14 loops on our hook now. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Then we'll pick up that side loop again and do a regular return pass. Okay, we'll work that same lace pattern again. So we pick up the loop in the first one at regular TSS, then our hook goes under both of those next 2 to pull up a loop, TSS in the next. 2 together, TSS. 2 together, TSS. One last time, 2 together, TSS, and then we make our connection to pull up that last loop. And again, you should only have 11 loops on your hook for this row. Yarn over, pull through 2, chain 1. Yarn over, pull through 2 twice, chain 1. Yarn over, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, yarn over and pull through 2 3 times to finish that row. So just to go over what's on the chart here a little bit for you, it can be a bit confusing where we make those chain 1s. We have to remember the first time after we've made the connection and we yarn over and pull through 2, we're doing both of those return passes at the same time. and then it's to chain 1, pull through 2 twice, chain 1, the 2 pull through. So it's just that first one where we take the border stitch off, and the next one it happens all at the same time. So don't let that confuse you too much there. So we have worked the end of row 8. Nope, we've worked row 7, so we're going to work row 8 together, and then I'll let you do the other repeats on the chart. So row 8 again is picking up all the loops again, so in those first 2 are TSS, and then in the hole to pick up a loop. TSS in the next 2, in the hole to pick up a loop. TSS in the next 2, in the hole to pick up a loop, TSS in the next 2, one last time in the hole to pick up a loop, and then TSS in the last stitch, and then go ahead and make our connection stitch, and ready for the regular return pass, where we just yarn over and pull through 2 until all the loops are off our hook and we're left with the final loop to start the next row. So to continue working block 11, you'll work another row of reverse stitch, 2 rows of TSS, another row of reverse stitch, and then these 2 rows twice, like we just worked for the 2 together stitches in the lace pattern. And you'll do that whole set one more time, ending with 2 rows, a row of reverse and 2 rows of TSS. So you can go ahead and work your way through the chart for block 11, and I'll meet you here at the end. So when you finished block 11, you should have these 3 sections of that lace pattern with the reverse stitch on either side of the TSS in the middle. Ending, of course, with the reverse stitch row and 2 TSS rows. And then you need to make sure you do the bind off row as well, finishing that bind off row on the vertical line. So block 11 is finished. So we're going to be working our vertical lines now. We want to work the vertical line beside block 11, and once we get to the top, we will continue on with the horizontal line across blocks 10 and 11. So we'll just join our yarn at the far edge of the vertical line we did previously, and ignoring the bind off stitches, we'll work across to the front under the loops like a TSS to pick up our loops. So we'll pick up 4 loops across, and then join to the back side of that first row of block 11 and work the regular return pass. Okay, and we'll just pick up loops like TSS across, oops, and joining to each of the rows on block 11. So you can go ahead and work this vertical line. I'll meet you at the top after row 27. So once we've worked that vertical line, we're going to start working across for the horizontal. So don't bind off the vertical line. So we'll just start picking up the loops on the vertical line like usual. So we'll pick up 4 loops there. And then working across block 11 on the back side of those top loops, we want to pull up our loops. We're going to be pulling up 13 loops. Sorry, my yarn's a little bit tight for that one. So 13 loops across the top of block 11. 13 loops across block 11. And then working in front for the lines here, skipping the border stitch, we'll pick up 4 more loops on the vertical line. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 loops there. And then working again across the back here, we will pick up 13 loops on block 10. 1, so we've picked up 4 loops, 13, 4, and 13, so you should have 35 loops on your hook, including that starting loop. And then we will connect to the next row up on the vertical line from last week and make our regular return pass. And then we'll work 2 more rows of TSS and bind off this horizontal line. Our last block for this week is block number 12. So that's this top block up here. You can see how it's a bit of an au jour or lace pattern as well. And it's created by putting 3 stitches together, but it's worked in the return pass. So there's a couple new symbols that we want to look at for this pattern. The first one is this symbol here. This is worked in the return pass, indicating a chain, 3 together, and another chain. So I'll help you with that when we get to that section here. Then after we have worked this stitch in the next forward pass, we will be using these 2 symbols. So this symbol represents we're going to pick up a loop in the open space that's created by these chains in this symbol. And right here, we're picking up our loop on top of this cluster, this 3 together stitch. So I'll help you with those as we get to those in the chart, but just wanted to draw your attention towards that before we get started. So for 12, we want to attach our yarn behind our work just after this 4th loop from the side of the vertical line. So I've attached to the back, the loop in the back, and then you just work behind each of these stitches, picking up a loop. So you'll have 30 stitches that you pick up, plus our starting one of 31, attaching to the side here as usual and doing the regular return pass. So that's our row 1, the foundation row for this chart for block 12. We're going to work another row of TSS, but in the return pass of this next row 2, we're going to work these 3 together. So let's go ahead and pick up our loops for row 2, and I'll meet you just before the return pass. So for the return pass and working these 3 together stitches, after we've done the connection, we will pull through 2 loops. Then we're going to do this repeated, pull through 1 loop, pull through 4, pull through 1, pull through 2 twice, and we'll repeat that red part. We've made our connection to row 2, ready for the return pass. We pull through 2, pull through 1, pull through 4, pull through 1. Then we'll pull through 2 twice, pull through 1, pull through 4, pull through 1, 2 twice, 1, 4, 1, 2 twice, 1, 4, 1, 2 twice, 1, 4, 1, 2 twice, and one more time, 1, 4, 1, and 2 twice. So we should be able to see when we pull through 4, that's pulling through the one on our hook plus these 3 stitches, and you can see how they've come together there. We should have 6 of these 3 together down our row. So now when we go the next row, row 3, to pick up our loops, when we get to this section here, we will insert under the chain into that hole or that space to pick up a loop. On top of the 3 together, there's this one horizontal loop across the top. We will go under there to pick up a loop, and then in this space again. So let's work row 3 together. So we TSS that first stitch, then in that hole where we had a chain 1, we insert and pick up a loop. On top of the cluster or the 3 together, we pull up a loop, and in the hole we pull up a loop, and then TSS 2. So just repeat that down this row. In the hole, on top of the cluster, in the hole, TSS 2. And then at the end, there's just the 1 TSS, or that last stitch instead of the 2 to pick up. Connection to our side and regular return pass for row 3. So then we'll work rows 4 and 5. To pick up the loops, they're just straight TSS. On row 4, we will do the regular return pass. Row 5 will pick up the loops in TSS, and then on the return pass is when we work those cluster or 3 together stitches again. So I'll meet you here for the return pass of row 5. So I'm ready for the return pass of row 5. Remember, we will pull through 2 loops and then begin the pattern of pull through 1, pull through 4, oops, pull through 1, pull through 2 twice, and repeat that all the way. 1, 4, 1, 2 twice, and so on. So let you finish that return pass, and I'll see you here for the forward pass of row 6. Okay, so for row 6, just a reminder, we start with the TSS, and then in that hole or the space from the chain 1, we pull up a loop. On top of the 3 together or cluster, we pull up a loop, and in the space we pull up a loop, TSS in 2. So you can just repeating that all the way down to do the forward pass for row 6. And then row 6 will end with a regular return pass. And then I'll let you to follow the chart all the way through to row 12. And after row 12, you will do the bind off row as well. So when you have finished these 12 rows of this last block for this week, make sure you do the bind off row and attach behind that vertical line. So now for the finishing steps, we're just going to work this little vertical line here and the horizontal line across the top to complete week 3. So again, you will join your yarn on the back side, and ignoring the bind off stitches, come across to the front to pull up the loops. 4 loops we're pulling up across the front, and then attaching to that first row of block 12 that we just worked. And then the regular return pass. We'll just continue the rows of TSS. Working those 12 rows up the side of block 12, and I'll meet you at the top. So when you finish the 12 rows of the vertical line, we're going to start that horizontal line. So we just work across the top and pick up the 4 loops from the vertical line, and then working in back of block 12, we will pick up 30 more loops. So when you've picked up the 30 loops, you should have 35 on your hook. Then you'll make that connection to the vertical line and work the regular return pass. And then 2 more rows of TSS plus the bind off row. So once you finish your bind off of that final line, week 3 is complete. Great job!